So, hello, Chris Shannon, Jason Smith, and John Jeremiah Robb. Um, we are here with, these are continuing discussions that I've been hosting here on my channel about race in America, and really been hoping to get to a panel, and I'll probably need to look at um, diversifying the gender of the panels as we move forward. But this is the first time we've had four of us in this conversation together, and again, my channel is really about sharing stories of regular people, but I feel that, especially with recent events, that our race and the way we deal with each other based on that, or don't deal with each other based on that, is part of all of our stories, as specifically as Americans. And so I've been talking with Chris for a while, and John joined us last time, and this time we've got the one and only Jason Smith.
I appreciate that.
How many other Jason Smiths are out there? Let me ask you that.
Wow.
I'm the only one on this block, I think.
Okay, there you go. So our goal is to have an open conversation where we're free to express our views and talk about these issues openly and without judgment, and while talking to each other. I think the most important thing that we can do as Americans is talk to people who are not like us. And we have that opportunity maybe like no other country does. We have so many different cultures and ideas and people here that we have the ability to talk to so many people that are different from us in every way. And of course, everybody's different, but I'm saying in a general sense. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And so let's jump in. So our first conversation is talking about depressed areas in America that are mostly Black. I mentioned to John a minute ago the words we've used to describe them forever. We would say the ghetto. Maybe back when my parents were younger, we would call it the hood. I don't know what's politically correct, what's not. I think we all know what we're talking about is economically depressed areas that are where we have a large percentage of our African American population resides in these areas. So what can we do in these areas, and what are some of the problems that are leading to that have solutions that we can talk about today? And since Jason's our first one here, I'll let him jump in first. I didn't warn you about that. Sorry, I just.
You put him on the spot. Go ahead.
Wow.
I literally just thought of that. So.
I knew I should have called in sick to this when I saw it was at 3:00 on a Sunday afternoon. Wow, that's I don't even know where to begin. I think there is a definite problem. My history, I've grown up. This horrible English. I grew up in North County. I was raised in a very open family when it came to race, sexuality, socioeconomical class, anything like that. I grew up a poor kid in Overland, basically, with a single mom, and dad worked, didn't live too far from there. But I've thought a lot about this over the week, and I think something that is, I don't know how to put it exactly. I think it's half community, it's half household when it comes to some of these areas or the mentality, because it becomes a generational thing. So you can't say it's just based on one specific economic factor or one particular bad time or something like that. So instead of what I was trying to think of this week, instead of looking at it from what do I think those places should be doing that I don't live in, even though I grew up in a poor area, what made my area better than some of these, or even now where I live right now, what makes that different? And I think a lot of it is toleration. There aren't things that are tolerated. There are expectations that you don't do certain things, and it starts from the household and it goes into the community. The community just doesn't allow it. And I'll give an example. When I was in high school, I had a giant party one time, and it was probably not what my mom wanted. And people ended up making a mess all along the street. I got a call first thing in the morning from Janet that lived like 5 houses up. She'd been there since before my parents moved in. And she goes, and she was an old retired woman. She goes, Jason, I don't know what went on last night at your house, but you need to get your butt up here and clean this crap up right now. And that to me really resonated a lot when it comes to these, because when it comes to questions like this, because to me, so much of it comes down to not only the individual family, parents, and households with sort of expectations they create and what they allow, but it's also the community too. And it's easy to say that the community allows it because it's probably the hardest thing to fix. But I think the thing too is that if enough people don't stand up and say, this isn't how we want to live, this isn't how we want our neighborhood, nothing's going to change. Because even where I live now, it's a certain way, because people won't put up with it. You'll hear about it, whether it's they call the cops or they call you or they come knocking on your door, or the homeowners association says something, whatever the case may be, there's some sort of accountability for it. And I think that mixed in with a generational lack of expectation. I wanted to use the word victim mentality, but I think that it's a weak term, victim mentality, or it makes a person seem weak. I think what it is, and I'll shut up here in just a second, but it comes down to not only the community, but also coupled with the fact that I think there's a pervasive opinion that folks in areas like that, they're doomed to that. That's it. That's as good as they're going to get. So they fall into these bad things, or because they think the story has already been written, and or let more people know that no matter what your circumstances are that you grew up with, your story is not written. I grew up as a poor with an alcoholic mother in Overland, and I am not a poor adult alcoholic in Overland. So you have to make the choice. You have to decide that that's not what you're going to be. I was lucky enough to have a good external family support system, and neighbors like Janet up the street kicking my butt in gear when I didn't do things. So there we go. That's what happens when you let me go first. There's the time limit, so I just take it all.
Oh, you're good. So I guess I'll go. I would say that I agree to some of your points about just kind of all of those different things that you threw out combined. I think a huge problem is if you go back in history, you just kind of look at how Black people are just minorities replaced. It was a very racial type of thing where, when these different communities were built out, Black people were put in specific locations, the ghettos, right? Mm-hmm. And that was for the sole purpose of not allowing them to kind of interact with the general public, the other, white folks in suburban areas and in better areas. So it was kind of structured this way when you look back in history, and it's never been disassembled. It's been an ongoing problem. So you have the ghettos, you have poor housing, you have poor education, you have people that the term is people that are being victim to the streets. They're victim to the streets. These kids, these adults, these people that live in these ghettos, or I like to say low income areas, they don't, to your point, Jason, they do feel trapped. They feel like there is no outlet. Some of them do make it out and they get to a point where, they see the light at the end of the tunnel and they do what they can to get out of there. But some of them, majority of them, they feel trapped like that's all they know. So they're a victim to the streets. They're a victim to their circumstances. You also have broken homes, a lot of due to just, various factors, including the whole police involvement in the killing of Black people. You got, what am I trying to say? You got one parent homes is what I'm trying to say. So you don't have both parents in the homes. The dad might not be there for whatever reasons, either whether it's because by choice or, being a victim to the streets, that being shot and dead and killed or jailed, right? So you got all of these different issues, man, and it's really rough to be in a situation like that, and have no real resources or help to kind of be successful. It's almost like you're at the lowest point of your life and there's no outlet and you're kind of stuck. And then the last thing that I would say, and before I let Chris take over, is the lack of trust in policing. A lot of these communities, they don't trust the police. right? And so you have that, right? So if you're a victim to the streets and you're dealing with the gang violence, the drugs, and all these other issues that I pointed out, you also have the fact that the community is not connected with the police, which allows for a lot of these crimes to happen and a lot of the issues to impact these low income and ghettos, if you will. So it's more than, to your point, just one specific problem. It's a bunch of problems that need cleanup before progress can be made. And I personally don't know where to start, but it's got to start somewhere. So
I can tell you exactly where to start. Well, first, let's start with education. And in those areas where the schools are not as healthy, I guess, for the lack of a better term, than schools in suburban areas, right? They don't have the resources, they don't have the funds coming in, right? And it's all because of the property value and all that and the taxes that are paid in those areas. So, of course, the schools are going to lack because of that, right? So now you have a kid that's going to school, even the ones that are, let's say, A students, the curriculum that they receive is not as condensed or not as, you know what I mean? They're not getting that same stuff that somebody in suburbia is getting, right? Then this kid wants to go to college and he's not prepared for college. So of course he's not going to excel in college just like his, you know, somebody that grew up in suburbia, right? And it's not saying that they're victims or whatever, because now let's look at this. Let's say Black unemployment was 95%, right? Not too long ago. And I think right now it's 12%. That means 95% of Blacks are working. And at our worst point right now, we have about, 87% Blacks working that are of age to work. So what does that tell you? That tells me that there's something wrong then with the way that our, not financial, but the way that our businesses and everything are structured, right? Out of the Fortune 500 companies, case in point, there's only 4 Black CEOs, right? And it's not saying, hey, you know, everybody's doing anything wrong, but actually there is some things that are still resonating from 1964. Let's go back to 1964, the Civil Rights Act, right? There was a lot of things placed like redlining, right? As far as mortgages, therefore we were only allowed to live in certain areas, right?
Yeah.
There were a lot of things as far as moving up in a company. So that's why we had to have the Civil Rights Act, right? And that was just a generation ago. So just because the act passed, does that mean then that there aren't still people that are in authority or that are in high power, in high positions, whatever, that are still walking around with that mentality that as a Black person, so I don't think he's good enough, right? So my point is there's, and you all have pointed this out as well, that there's so many different things that we need to tackle in order to make this economical recovery for the low income areas. Because think about it, if 95% of Blacks are working, then why is over 40% under the poverty level? That means that they're underemployed. They're working, but they're not getting the jobs that everyone else get, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Jonathan and myself, we're outside of that. We've been blessed. I can speak for myself, been blessed to, you know, work in a nice company and make a nice living for me and my wife, and moved out of the city. But that's not the case for all Blacks. So let me tie in the Civil Rights Act. If you think about it, if we're still having people that are owners of the company, CEOs of the companies, stockholders of the companies, and still have the mentality that, well, you know what, I want to hire someone that looks like me, acts like me. I'm not so sure about this Black guy, right? You still have people that are in power doing that. So therefore, the kid that does get out of the ghetto, that does get out of the hood, that did go to college and managed to make it through, he's not necessarily going to be able to elevate in corporate America, right? And 10%, just last year, 10% of all college students were Black, right? Of all college students. So that means graduates, I'm sorry, not just college students, graduates, right? So 10% of all college graduates were Black, right? So that means that there are people that are trying to come out of that, but we still have some things, some odds against us, right? So if we're looking at employment, helping Blacks to get gainfully employed, we're looking at education, making sure that that kid in the ghetto can get the proper education so that he can be a contributor to our society, right? And if all of us are contributors to society, just think of how great our country would be. Yeah, we already have a great country, but just think of if we, because what's that, the herd mentality, the herd is only as slow as its slowest member. So if we can get all of those that are lagging behind in the place where they're also contributing, we're going to be just that much greater, right? We'll be a force that nobody can reckon with. But we got to get out of this whole idea that blacks aren't trying to do things, or that blacks are perpetuating violence all the time, and all that we can think about is this or that or whatever. But because the fact is, we are trying to go to school, educate our kids, tell our kids, you know what, if you pulled over, make sure that your hands are up here so you can see them, right? Make sure that you say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, you know, and do your best at all times. I'm speaking for myself. My parents did that. I did that with my kids, my aunts and uncles, people in my neighborhood. They all had that same mentality. Just like you, Jason, man, Miss Lenora lived across the street. If she saw us doing anything wrong, she whooped our butt. And then she took us to our parents and told us what we did and what she saw us doing. And then our parents whooped our butt right in front of her. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that there are some odds that are stacked against us. And what I would like to see is that people, you know, acknowledge that, recognize that. No, we're not victims. However, it still doesn't take away the fact that there are some odds that are stacked against us. And just because we had the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which is just a generation ago, that doesn't mean that that it just went away. There's still people in high places that are still walking around with hidden biases. Some knowingly have a bias, and some are just don't realize that they have a bias. I'm sorry. I'll give back my time.
Yeah, shut up. Shut it up.
Back my
No, I'm just
time.
playing. I would make a quick comment. I would say that, you know, when it comes to black people, I think the general idea is that no one wants a handout. I think a lot of when people hear black folks not cry, but raise concerns, I would say. I don't want to say cry. Raise these concerns. It's not that people want handouts. They don't want any freebies. It's that, you know, people want fairness. They want an even playing field where they have the opportunity to excel or succeed in life, you know? So right now the playing field isn't level. I could tell you that I didn't grow up my whole life in a ghetto or anything like that, but I've been there. I grew up in the hood, so you will. I grew up around gang members. I've tried to get recruited by a gang, never. I was just a strong individual, so I never felt the need to join a gang or be a part of one. But my buddies, my friends, they were gang members. You know what I'm saying? Great guys, but they were involved in that gang life. They didn't see any benefit in going to school and getting educated because they were victim to the streets. So they joined the gangs. They got involved in the drugs. They went down that path. Some of them are dead. Most of my friends that I knew in high school, they're dead. Some of them are in jail for, 34 years to life, whatever. Some of them made it out, but they're struggling because, again, they didn't have the proper resources and opportunities to excel in life. So that's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, do you think part of that? I think I agree 100%. I think with education, it's such a huge thing, and it's, my grandfather told me years ago, and I was a late bloomer I went to college for a year right outside of high school. I had a couple things happen with the career I was intending to, and then I had my son, and then I had life, and I went back and I finished my undergrad in my early 30s as a single dad, and then finished my MBA right after that.
I'm doing the same thing as you.
We're all in the same boat, Jason.
That's the same thing, buddy.
We're all in the same boat.
But the thing I always remembered, my grandpa Jack told me years ago, he's like, stay in school. He goes, stay in school, get that degree. He goes, because no matter what happens to you, no one can ever take that away from you. And I think that's the key. And that's what so many people don't see, or maybe that's, part of the problem is they don't see, one, that they have the right to that it doesn't matter now. This is removing society's stigma and maybe some pervasive opinions and things like that over the last 100 years or better, but everyone has the right to that education. You don't, just because you're poor, just because you don't live in a crappy community, whatever the case is, you have the right to that. And I think so many people don't see that, or they don't see they deserve it, or they don't see the empowering aspect of that. And that's those steps to realize that you deserve better. And I think that's really what it comes down to. But a lot of people don't see that, but they also don't see a way to do that because so many people around them don't have that same vision as them. And I mean, I don't know what that's like as a young black male, because I've never been a young black male, but I know what that's like as a young white guy living in a very middle class, lower to middle class, blue collar area where it was like the everyday talk wasn't going to college. You know, it was, hey, you get a job here, you work hard, you do this and things like that. And, you know, as time and technology passes, those opportunities just, they aren't there, but they're also not what's going to take you to that next level, or maybe start lifting a generation of people out. And the more we get people like that, the more it's going to naturally squash some of those lingering, older, misguided opinions that are, you know, repressive and oppressive to black people, repressive to women, repressive to you know, gays, whatever it is, anything that doesn't fit the standard opinion of what people have thought success or a successful business person or a corporate person should be at a C level, you know, for the last 50, 100 years. But yeah, I think it's so crucial.
So I would comment on this, Jason, because I want to paint a picture for you to help you understand just a little bit. So just envision a 16-year-old, 17-year-old boy, you know, about to reach manhood and to the point of graduating high school and potentially thinking about going to college and going that route. This kid has a mom, right? Also has a dad, but dad is not really there. Dad is in the streets and never really is home and is hardly, he's no call, no show. He's hardly even there. So you could just say a single parent home, right?
Right.
Mom is struggling to pay the bills. They're in the hood. They're in the projects. They're in an area where stuff is always stolen and she doesn't make enough to make ends meet. This kid has some choices to make because in his heart, he's like, man, what should I do? He has an option to go to college, like you said, right? But he's also seeing his mom struggle, and no one wants their mom to struggle. So he's like, man, I really want to help out around here. So let me maybe go get a job and just say, you know what, forget school. Because that's not really in scope for me right now. I want my mom to be in a better position, a better spot. He goes and he gets a job at Taco Bell or Burger King, whatever the case may be, making, you know, $6 an hour. Even what he does plus what his mom does is still not enough to keep food in the house, keep the lights on, and just keep them from getting evicted. So at this point, you know, the good neighborhood drug dealer's like, man, you could ditch that junk and you can come over here and make some real money, and we can really get you some change in your pocket. You can put your mom in a better situation. So this 16-year-old boy now faced with the option of going to school, ditch that, went to Taco Bell. That wasn't working out because money's still not coming in like it needs to. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and get these drugs and flip these drugs and get this money so I could take care of my mom. I only painted that picture for you, and that's one of many stories that these kids in the ghetto and in the projects have to. These are the decisions they have to make. And I'm not saying them going and being a gangster or drug dealer is the right option, but when you're put in a corner like that as a kid and you got to make some type of decision, what would you do? You know what I'm saying? And that it goes back to society and the way things are set up. I think that it needs to get cleaned up. Things need to be better. But when you look at it from the mindset of what I just kind of detailed out to you right there, that's a big issue.
So
then let's paint another picture. The kid, you know, he didn't give in to drugs or gangs or anything like that. But when he graduated from high school, mom and dad are both working 2 jobs, but it's just enough to pay for him and his sister to live there comfortably, right? So he's about a B student, so scholarships aren't really, you know, there. He's not a great at basketball or football or anything, so he's going to go to community college, but he's still struggling to do that. He's working to try to help his mom and dad take care of him as far as going to school. So instead, he just, like you, Jason, and like myself and Jonathan, just decide, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and work. I'll get back to college later, right? So he finds himself, instead of at the age of 25, done, you know, with college, at least a bachelor's degree, and being able to get an even better job, he's stuck at the bottom of the totem pole, working at Taco Bell, McDonald's, or maybe even an entry level at a corporate America, right? But it's still not enough to make sure that he can break the generational curse, or for the lack of a better term, you know what I mean? Where his parents have to work as much, but now he's working because, you know, none of them have that education. didn't give in to drugs or violence or anything like that, just still not able to fight against those odds that have been stacked against them. And again, not trying to paint a victim mentality, but I just wanted to make it real that these are some of the things that the Black Americans go against, that are up against. And it goes all the way back to, after slavery, we had the Black Code. So even though they were free, they really weren't free. Then after that, we had Jim Crow laws. And then just recently, like I've mentioned before, we have the Civil Rights Act just a generation ago. So we had no generational wealth, right? Very few.
Mm-hmm.
Some did, but very few did. So all the way up until like my generation, Jonathan's generation, are we starting to now see an accumulation of wealth within our families. But before then, it was very few or none at all.
So let me ask this. So we've opened about 20 cans of worms. So
wasn't me.
Yeah, so let's
Jonathan. It's always Jonathan's fault.
Hey, that's what I'm here for, baby. That's what I'm here for.
let's dial in on one. So I think everybody, from the sounds of things, agrees that education is probably the number one thing that
yes,
that if we can get schools and my wife is a teacher in St. Charles County, and some of the kids from when Normandy was shut down or defunded or whatever, I don't know how it worked as a school district. Some of those kids came out to St. Charles County, and generally speaking, they were 2 to 3 grade levels below the kids that of the same age that they were now in school with. A few of those kids were able to rise up and meet the challenge, and the ones that weren't kind of just cruised and so it's the same thing. You're in a bad situation and you don't see a path to success. So let's say, so we all agree that if we can improve the schools and the education for our children, that we can see generational change 30 years from now. I mean, is that fair? And I don't think it's tough to see it quicker than 30 years because that is a generation. I don't think this is a non-generational problem. I think it's going to take 20 to 30 years if we start turning those schools around today. So what is the stopgap? What do we do? First, we figure out how to address those schools, which we're not doing. We're not figuring out we're not doing that. And I don't know what those answers are. Becomes a political discussion. That's where everything tends to fall apart, unfortunately. So what is the stopgap to fill in that 20 to 30 years, assuming we started working on schools today, to help the people that are in the situation where they feel, they feel doomed to what they've got. They're a victim to the streets. Where do we fill in those gaps? John, you mentioned that you're a victim to the streets, but there's also a lack of police trust. So it's like, yeah, there's these kids dealing drugs and making a living doing that, and they're ruining people's lives while doing that, but they're making a bunch of money for their family. And then their neighbors who are law-abiding citizens and working 2 jobs and their son's working a job, they're still barely making ends meet. They don't trust the police. But how do you bring all that in line, I guess, on a temporary basis until we can get the education levels up to where they need to be so that we're all in the same playing field in an ideal world 20 to 30 years from now? What's the measure in between that we do to do that?
Chris, I'm gonna let you tackle that one.
Oh, okay.
Let me think a little bit, Derek.
Well, I think it starts with the people, right? And all people. Black, white, gay, straight, all people writing, emailing, whatever it takes, getting in touch with your congressman or woman and saying, hey, we all acknowledge because there's strength in numbers. If it's just me and Jonathan saying, hey, our cousins in the hood needs better education, it's not really going to go anywhere, right? It's going to fall on deaf ears. But if we all get on the same page and say, you know what, we do realize that there is a problem, and we want you, we put you there in the high place. Now we want you to earn your money, right? And so that might mean, passing some legislature that says, you know what, for those low income areas, we're going to send additional funds to those schools so that they can have better resources, better teachers. And you know what, teacher here in Wentzville, if you will volunteer to go down the city, I know this is a tall order, but if you will say that, yes, you will go down to the city, we're going to give you an incentive for not only your commute, but also for, just being one of the people that's going to try to exact change, right? So we're going to need better resources. We're going to need more funding in those low income areas. And it starts with us as people letting our congressmen and women know that we acknowledge there's a problem and that we, the people, say that we want you to fix it.
I agree.
That's for starters.
I agree. And to add to what Chris said about, I think it comes down to funding. So funding these schools and just so they can have more resources and just kind of help these kids be successful. I think this is another topic for another podcast, but when we talk about teachers and pay and compensation, I mean, that helps, right? I mean, some of these teachers don't, in these inner city schools, they don't make nothing. So if they don't make hardly anything, then what incentive or what motivation do they have to really teach these kids up and get them to the educational level that they need to be at, right? So I'm not saying teachers are bad in inner city schools, but I am saying that is an issue. Along with the pay gaps with teachers, but that's a whole issue over the entire United States. But again, yeah, funding for these different areas for sure to improve the educational system.
And we can have an incentive to be like, let's say, I forget the name of the test that they have at different grade levels, but like the national test or whatever. Well, you know what? If 90% of your students hit this mark, then your school and your teachers get this bonus or whatever. And if 80% and so forth. So basically giving them a reason to really push the kids. I don't know what the exact answer is, but these are just some ideas that I've been kind of playing around with. Not that they would definitely work, but I think that, to Jonathan's point, the teachers aren't getting paid enough. And then secondly, we don't have the resources for the kids, the books, and all the things that they need to have a proper education. Oh, and by the way, if you're a B or A student, guess what? We're going to make sure that you have a scholarship. It might not be to Yale or Harvard. Now, if your SAT or ACT gets you there, then yes, maybe. But we're going to make sure that you get to secondary school, because you've shown that not only are you, passing these national exams and tests or whatever, but you're excelling as a student and you show that you want to come up out of the ghetto, then we're going to help you get out of the ghetto. And it doesn't just have to be black kids and ghetto kids, but any kid in America shouldn't have to worry, or they shouldn't have to make a decision on whether or not I'm going to help my mom and dad make ends meet or go to school. You shouldn't have to make that decision at 16.
Agreed. I would argue in a little different direction, especially if we're looking for something that can make a difference now. And I think it plays into what both of you are saying. I think the number one priority, and it might be because I'm a lifelong St. Louisan, and I think it's a major problem with St. Louis City when it comes to people wanting to live there, businesses wanting to come in there and stay there. It's violence. You have to get the violence down. You have to make the community safer. Those teachers from Wentzville, they'll come and teach in the city, because most teachers want to teach and want to help kids, especially kids that are really going to benefit from it. There's no shortage of teachers in Francis Howell or in Wentzville. I live in Francis Howell. They make good money. It rightly so. I mean, we pay a lot in taxes. That's a totally different podcast.
Yep.
But the thing is that they'll go, they'll go there, but no one feels safe. I have a buddy whose wife got back into teaching, and it was kind of the same thing. And she was going into an area, and it was just not a safe area, and he was just downright nervous. And it's a guy that hasn't grown up with misguided expectations or with the silver spoon in his mouth, so to speak. But I think the violence works in two different ways in making the area safe. It's one, it's gonna allow the people that can come in there to help, the teachers and things like that, or businesses that come in there and they help build up the communities. That's going to help that. It's also going to take away something that really direct some of these young kids in, it takes them in the wrong direction, which is either you're scared for your life, so you become part of something, so you don't become a victim of it, meaning an actual victim of it, or you think that there's nothing else I can do because this is just going to happen to me, or I'm going to be dead by 29, or, you know, I'm not going to live to be older. So what do I care if I get a college degree and I make great money in 15 years? And I think that's one of the things that keeps the community down as a whole. And I think the bad people know that, and that's why they do it, because then they can control those areas. And then I think you have the flip side of it, where you have that communication and that lack of trust between the community and the police or people in authority. And I wholeheartedly agree that probably half of that is 100% legitimate, based on very poor interactions, very poor experiences. But I also believe that the other half is based on people saying things. You don't want to say propaganda, because that takes it another way. But if you grow up with people around you telling you that cops are bad or this person's bad, it's almost like racism, you know, until you realize that it's not, or this isn't necessarily the way it has to be, or this isn't necessarily the way I'm going to be. If that's what you grow up around in, and I don't necessarily mean from the home, but also from, you know, your kids, people at school, your neighborhood friends, things like that, you're going to have that mentality. And I've tried to teach my kids to be more open to things. Like the rare times I've been pulled over when they were younger, and they're like, oh, you know, the cop, I was like, doing his job. I was going too fast. He was there. He caught me, pulled me over. It's sort of setting that expectation, not expectation, but creating that relationship and why it is. Now I understand, again, going back to, especially in inner cities and in rough areas and things like that, half of the interactions are probably very inappropriate. They could be way better, and they could be better probably on both sides. But when you're the person in authority, you're the one that should be setting the standard as far as how the interaction goes. But I think the other half of that really is this perception that this is just the way it is, or it's how it's going to be. And it's, you know, you go back to, what is that? That book, The Secret, or the movie, you know, and my buddy and I, we used to joke about it. It's like, expect a check, get a check. It's that whole thing. If you go out, like I drive a Jeep. I never saw any Jeeps on the road until I went and I test drove one time. And I started thinking about Jeeps. All of a sudden I see Jeeps everywhere.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those, it's sometimes we set ourselves up as a society, as people, for our own failure, because we create the wrong sort of perception. And that might be based on legitimate things, but it limits, it gives you tunnel vision. And I think that's the exact same thing where a lot of racism comes from, is that, you know, people aren't born racist. You're racist, or you're intolerant to Hispanics or blacks or gays or women, anything like that, because the folks around you have been like that, and it's tolerated around them. And I think that's where so much of that, if we stopped that and we took a hold of that, we could really make a difference. But, and that's the violence is a huge thing, particularly in St. Louis. But I'm sure it's in other large cities across the country as well. I opened like 24 new cans of worms there. Sorry, Dirk.
Yeah, you did.
And I just want to, you did, but I want to stay focused on the education piece, because you did bring up a great point as to, you know, people not feeling safe going to those low income areas or whatever. But it's like, where do we start though? Do we try to clean up the areas and make sure that the violence isn't there? Or do we get the people there? Because I guarantee that if those kids feel a sense of hope, they 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, you know what, I do have a better opportunity. I can now see that there's something better to life than, you know, being out here in the streets with these guys, whatever. And then maybe those guys that were influencing them can say, you know, oh, wow, okay, so we are taking a turn. To your point, yes, half of it is some people that say, well, you know what, I'm not going to make it. You know, I'm in the hood, so nobody's going to help me out. And then the other half are saying, hey, I'm trying as hard as I can. So if we give them that chance, I believe 9 times out of 10 they're going to come up out of it. Me personally, I live right there in the heart of St. Louis, North St. Louis, Fairground Park, and a lot of the guys on our street, you know, some did give into gangs, some were former gang members, now have their own businesses, right? So I do believe that everybody wants to do well, right?
I agree.
We were talking about
100%.
crime in those areas. And I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but I know we hear that term black on black crime, but I feel that's, excuse me for saying this, but I think that's a really disrespectful term. And the reason why I'm saying it, not that it doesn't exist, but you don't hear about white on white crime or Hispanic on Hispanic crime. Of course, people that are in the same area are going to more than likely witness or experience crime from those that are in that area with them. And because America is still segregated, then yes, it's going to be mostly blacks, because 95% of the violence that are perpetuated against blacks, yes, is by blacks. But guess what? 85 to about 90% of crime to whites is perpetuated by whites. And you can go down the list, Hispanics or Asians, whatever, the same thing. So I say all that to say to say that if you look at the FBI report from 2018, and it shows, you know, the number, I did the math or whatever, but it will show you like the number of crimes that were perpetuated. I just want to get everybody out of the mindset that blacks perpetuate crime all the time, or there's nothing else to the black community, right? Because if you look at the numbers by the 2018 FBI crime report and compare it to the population of blacks in America, it will show you that only about 2% of blacks are criminals or being arrested for crimes. The other 98% are law-abiding citizens that are just trying their best to work. And I think that our media, I think that those old thoughts that you mentioned, Jason, the people that still have that old mentality, whatever, I think that it continues to be spread. So therefore, people are getting this unconscious bias, thinking that, well, blacks, they need to stop killing each other, or they need to stop stealing or whatever. But if you look at the numbers, and I urge everybody to go look for themselves, look at the FBI crime report and look at those numbers compared to the population, and you'll see for yourself that 98% of blacks, and same thing for any other race, right? About 99% of us across America want to do well. So the reason why I say that term black on black crime is disrespectful, because it's highlighting, or it's focusing on a specific group. It's saying, and it's planting that narrative, that false bias, that's all that blacks are capable of.
How
Speaking of can of worms.
No, I personally, if I can interject really quick, Greg, I think you make a couple excellent points, and I've used that term before, but I haven't used it as a way to try to me, it's more look into the community. You need to improve the community from the inside and out, and find ways why are so many young black men dying at the hands of other young black men. But I think you bring up an excellent point, that as far as the percent of the people that they're either going to live around or they're going to come across, if 90% of those are black and crimes are committed, 9 out of 10, you have a 90% chance that it's going to be a young black guy that does it. And that's completely fair. I think the other thing is, and this can get into many other things as well, is that bringing up those points that, that 98% aren't criminal. I would, without getting into another thing, and again, I've only experienced this as a white guy, is that I am a firm belief that the vast majority of people are not racist. I think the vast majority of Americans are decent people. They want to live their lives. They want to be happy like anyone else. I think we all have our own little things where it's people that we are, and I say people, but areas, environments, whatever we're accustomed to is more familiar to us than others. But I think the problem is that we have, in many cases, we have small percentages that get blown up and misrepresent a lot of people, when in some cases it should, because that's how you create change. But in other cases, like, to your point, the fact that I think one of the reasons that bad perceptions or inaccurate perceptions come from, like, people say, oh, white guy's walking down the street, or a woman, and a young black man's walking, they cross the street, there must be racist. I would argue that if that is actually the case, chances are they're probably more nervous about being a victim of a crime, because all we ever hear are crimes committed by young black men.
That's a good point.
Exactly.
I'm a 6'5" white guy who's in pretty decent shape, and I'd be lying if I told you that there isn't just a little part of me that maybe in the back of my mind that just goes, be a little more attentive. And it's not if it's just one person, if it's a group. And it's not because I don't give a crap if they're black, white, Hispanic, anything like that. But it's the perception that this is where all the crime is coming from. And that is, I think, that negatively impacts people's good sense and good naturedness and naturally good interpretations of folks, peoples, and situations. And so that's why I think your point is spot on with the 2% thing. If that was put on billboards and put on Google, instead of the stupid little pictures that come up where the Google words, I think it would be amazing. It would carry so much weight.
Absolutely. And I think that, to your point, that'll change some of those hidden biases, because to your point, everybody's not racist, but everybody has bias. I have bias. Mm-hmm. You have bias. Everybody have bias. But when it comes to that racial bias, I think, to your point, if we had something that says, hey, I know you might think this, but guess what? 98% of blacks are law-abiding citizens. If we saw that every day versus the media only showing what's going on in the hood, and maybe even showing some facts every now and then, because another thing, if you look at the FBI crime report, blacks aren't committing half as many crimes as it's shown, to your point. So therefore we have a negative perception. Even within our own community, we have a negative perception of ourselves. Like,
I would say to you, Chris, I mean, I agree with that. I think that if the news was a little bit more fair, the media represented all the news fairly across the board, then you wouldn't have those stereotypes out there. If every time you turned on the news in the morning before you went to work, you saw, a black guy with dreads robbed a liquor store or shot somebody or whatever, that's all you see every single day, every time you turn on the news. In your mind, all black people with dreads are a problem. So anytime you're walking across the street and you see one, you're like, oh, shoot, let me kind of get away a little, because he might be doing something. That guy with dreads, that black guy with dreads, might be the nicest dude you'll ever meet in your entire life. But because you watch the news and they've told you that these type of people that look like this are doing all the crime, it kind of clouds your judgment. You know what I'm saying? And I think
100%.
that's a large problem across, the United States. It's been like that for a while. And people who, I'm not connected to TV that much. I stay away from TV as much as possible. And I judge each individual person versus, judging an individual and condemning an entire group. I don't do that. Each person is accountable for themselves, So I make that point to say that, I think we're going off on a tangent here, but I think that's a problem in its own. That's a whole nother podcast to talk about. But if we could kind of get rid of some of those stereotypes and people could be more open-minded, they wouldn't have those stereotypes and biases.
But that's one of those lingering things that we mentioned before. That propaganda didn't just start now. That's been going on since the end of slavery. If you pull up some old newspaper clippings from those times, it stoked fear in the white community that, hey, you know what, these free black men are going to come and rape your wives and your children, and they're going to steal and they're going to kill you. And that has continued ever since then, even up to now. So those are some of the things that we need to get rid of in our society so that we can get rid of some of the biases that we have. Therefore, a guy like me walks in the store or whatever, and I'm trying to get a job there, it won't be necessarily, hey, he has dreads, so he's a black guy and he has dreads.
Right.
No way.
Well, I was in the store today, and I'm gonna say this really quick. I saw this dude was like 6'8" white guy. I wasn't feared by him. I wasn't scared. I mean, he looked like a football player, but I wasn't alarmed to say that he was going to rob me or do anything.
Right.
He was a big teddy bear. You know what I'm saying? He's a cool dude. But we ran into each other in the store today, and he was talking to me. We were chatting about some things, and it was a normal conversation. But again, I don't have that stereotype built in my head that every time I see a 6'8", white guy with tattoos, that he's a threat. So
Right. I agree.
There's been that newspaper headline floating around on Facebook where it's this little tiny side article about the white college kid that got arrested for murder, and the big giant headline is a black kid that stole a car. And it's like, what in the world?
Yeah.
How is that even possible? No, I honestly, I think Chris, you're completely accurate that because these are generational issues that we deal with, it's not even, there's nothing most of the time, and I think Jason mentioned, most of the time it's not on purpose. It's just something that you grow up around it. That's how you've seen it done. You do it. And it may even be taught in college to print the newspaper that way. Not even on a racial basis, just, whatever gets the attention. I don't even know. But, so we meandered a bit, but, how do we get to the point? Because we talk about education and we talk about bridging the gap so that, I think of the 60s, I think of, you guys have mentioned, the gang culture. You join a gang and everything that goes along with that, and then you can make money for your family as opposed to Taco Bell, right?
Yep.
So in the 60s, prior to the 60s, we had a really big, Italian gang, whatever you want to call it. And sorry for the Italian Americans, but we had this mafia problem or whatever. And Kennedy came in, and him and his brother just wiped it out. They just went after him. And that had been building up over time. But we have this issue where in black communities, and we've seen it demonstrated in front of our faces for the past 2 months, right? And longer than that, but really broadly, that, we could say, let's go in and wipe out the gangs, but the trust level of the community isn't there for law enforcement to do that in an effective manner. Because let's say that the FBI said, we're going to go in and clean up one of these gangs, whatever they're named, I don't care, whatever, in the inner city that's 90% black. They could do that, and the first kid they arrested wrongly would be the 95% focus of all that, even if they'd arrested 1,000 of these gang members properly. So how do we get to that narrative, right? Because that's a narrative too you don't want that one. You don't want that kid to be arrested improperly, and you don't want George Floyd to be murdered. I mean, for the love of God, any one of us could pay a bill, we've talked about this, pay with a counterfeit 20 and have no idea we did it, right? But what about the 1,000 transactions that are good transactions? And how, I'm meandering now.
It's to your point, Derek, it's going to take a while before the community is built back up to the point of trusting the police. Okay. Gang culture has been around for a while. And the reason I'm not taking the side of gangs, or I'm not, promoting it is a good word. I'm not promoting any kind of gangs because I don't see it as any benefit. And I think they're not great. They're not good at all. But the reason a lot of these gangs developed and exist was to combat some of the issues that exist in America. So because there was racism, because you had the KKK, because you had corrupt police, because you had different people preying on minorities, these gangs were developed to combat that. Now, they took it to another level. At first it was let's organize and combat that and protect ourselves and keep everything safe from the people that are oppressing us. Then it turned into a whole nother situation where now you got gangs that control certain territories within these ghettos. And if you wear a red flag, you can't come over to the blue flag area or we're going to shoot you. So it evolved over time, right? And I'm just giving you a general quick snap of it. There's more to it than that. But now you got these areas where they're heavily gang populated. To your point, we keep throwing this black on black crime. It's more of it is black on black, and we've already talked about the numbers, but you got territorial issues where you got gangs from certain areas where they're trying to, for the benefit of drugs, they're trying to control certain areas, and these gangs are set up like a business. So these certain territories that they're running and kind of putting all these drugs into these areas, that's their profit areas. So now if another gang goes and sells drugs in another territory and this and that, now you got wars going on where you got a lot of black on black, violence and killings going on. On top of that, and I want to say that I respect, the good police officers, and I ain't got nothing wrong with them, but this might hurt a few people's feelings. Cops are involved in some of that. They're involved in some of the drug activities and the selling to benefit from the profits of the streets. So when we say that there's a lack of trust between the community and cops, it's a big lack of trust, because there's some dirty cops out there, and the reason that the picture has been painted that they can't be trusted is because due to their involvement in the streets and some of the dirty things that they have done. So it's going to take a long time to clean that up, to get the community to say they trust a police officer, because I'm going to be completely honest, and I'll shut up. When you're in the ghettos, the worst thing that you can do when crime is going on in these areas is go tell the police, "Oh, John, you're crazy." Why am I crazy? The reason I say that is because who do you want to answer to? The drug dealer that lives next door to you that will take your whole family out? Or do you want to answer to the police, that may just lock you up? Which one do you want to answer to? I'd rather answer to not answer to the drug dealer guy who will take my whole family out and kill me for being a snitch. So I don't interact with the police. I keep my mouth shut. I don't tell them nothing. We handle all our issues in the streets, and that's the mentality. And I'm not talking like I've been in the streets for a while. I've been out for a while.
I don't know, Jonathan. I don't know. You sounded kind of gangster right there. You sounded kind of gangster.
So, but I've been out for a while. But anyway, the thought process, and I'm giving you guys the mindset so you guys understand. The thought process is you don't interact with the police because it's bad for the community. So we keep everything in house, and we'll handle our issues ourselves. So if somebody comes and violates us, we'll go kill one of their guys. They're not going to tell the police. They might come kill one of ours, vice versa, and then this thing continues to evolve. So I'm sorry I mentioned a lot, but go ahead.
Well, I think Jason touched on one of the things that may help fix it. You were talking about the improving the interactions between the police and the communities that they serve. And some of what Jonathan was saying kind of plays into that too. If I see that you are an authority and I know for a fact, it's not that somebody's told me, but I saw you down the street collecting money from the neighborhood drug dealer, or I saw you with this guy Antoine down the street who really didn't do anything, but yet you're shoving him in the car and you're being brutal and aggressive with him, then yeah, there's going to be a lack of trust. But if we can get those same police officers, I think I said it on one of your podcasts before, Dirk, where if it was more like those small towns where the sheriff and the couple deputies, if they know everybody there and they were familiar with them. So if he got drunk or whatever on the street, they're just going to lock him up overnight and let him go afterwards, right? While he sobers up, because they are familiar with them and they have that compassion for them because they have that interaction. It's not just a authority against the one that's perpetuating the crime. It's more of a family sense. You know what I mean? So I think if we can get our police officers to have more interactions with the community like that, and not just policing, but if there's a cookout or something, just stop by. Hey, how you guys doing? Everybody's okay over here? Because I've actually seen that, but I would like to see more of that. Me and my cousins used to, when we lived in the city, we would go to this place called Skate King. It was all the way down Natural Bridge. And if you missed the bus going home, you had to walk, right? Because the bus stopped running at about 9:30. We're about 12, 13, 14 years old. But anyway, we were walking along one night. It's like 10 o'clock. We're almost home. Cops pull over. Of course, our hearts start beating fast. But he was like, "Hey, what you kids doing out this late or whatever?" It was a Sunday night. School was the next day. They were like, oh, we missed the bus and my mom's going to kill us or whatever. And it was 3 of us. He let us ride in the car, and he took us on home. If you see more of that, then that'll kind of build the trust between the community and the police. And to Jonathan's point, I have nothing against police officers. My sister's in law enforcement. I have about 5 cousins in law enforcement. I know some that I've come across, that didn't know me from Abraham, but were still kind to me. We need those police officers, right? But we also need those police officers to hold their brothers and sisters accountable that are, part of the gang problem or that are being overly aggressive with a certain group of people. Because when you sit down with your fellow police officers or when you sit down at the dinner table with your family, some of the things that they're saying is not right. And if you just tolerate it, then of course they're going to think it's right. So we're at the time right now in America where we're saying that's no longer acceptable. And Dirk, I heard you say something about some people may not do it on purpose. Well, I remember telling my mom and dad, oh, I didn't do it on purpose. And my dad would say, well, why not? In other words, why wasn't you doing the right thing on purpose so that the wrong thing didn't happen or whatever? You get what I'm saying?
No, that's a great way to put it.
If I was being purposeful in what I'm doing, then those bad things won't happen. And if I did do it, and it did happen because of my purpose or whatever. I think that I'm trying to make some sense there.
Jason and Derek, have you guys seen Training Day by Denzel Washington?
It's been a while, but yeah.
So I mean, you guys seen kind of that was a pretty good movie in terms of how not all police are like that, but I've had good experiences. I've been pulled over and the cop didn't give me a ticket. They just said, "Hey, man, slow down. No issues here. Just chill out." So they're not all bad, but I think to Chris's point, if you want to build a community and you want to have that trust, they're going to have to start interacting with the community to where people feel trusted.
Well, I think that, and I think, it's a word you used before, which was policing. And I think that's a problem right there. Police aren't supposed to police. Police are there to protect and serve. And I think what happens when the mentality of the community and the police system as a whole is one that leans towards policing over protect and serve, then your mind's in the wrong place because you should be there. And we all get nervous when we see a cop. It's usually because we're speeding, if we're driving down the road. But no one should ever be nervous to see a cop unless they're doing something wrong, unless they're legitimately doing something wrong. And I think that is the biggest problem is that, and that perception is there legitimately in a lot of cases. It's there because bad interactions. It's been there because of bad cops, bad people, corruption, and things like that. And I think the way you address it and you fix it is first you have to address it. It's like alcoholism. It's like anything else. Until you acknowledge that there's a problem, you're never going to get past it. You're never going to fix it. But then you have to be open to what the problem is. And if we're using terms, if a police force is using terms or a community is using terms like policing, there's a problem. Police shouldn't be policing anything. They should be out within the community, making sure the community is safe and doing what they can do to help keep the community feeling safe and feeling comfortable with where they're at. They shouldn't be policing. Now, someone might argue going, well, it's the act of them doing that, but that's that whole perception that you may think that, but if I hear policing, it's automatically has negative connotations to me. And the vast majority of my interactions with police, since I was 16 or 17 anyway, has been exceptionally good. That could be luck. It could be because I'm white. It could be because of where I live. Whatever the case may be, I've been lucky in that instance. But I think so much of it comes down to that mentality, and police departments need to know that difference, because like you were saying there, that the local small town, they know that they're part of the community, and their job is to help keep the community safe. It's not to write tickets. It's not to throw people in jail. You have to do that. You have to do that. But it's to do what's best to keep the community safe as a whole, and to be part of the community, not to be some outside force that doesn't feel like it can't be. And the people in the community feel like, oh God, I see them. I don't want to interact with them, anything like that. And so Yeah, there's some excellent points there, because I really think that's the issue with policing in many cases as a whole. Quite honestly, it's a poor perception on both sides of what police should actually be doing.
So I'll put something out there that's cool. So you made a point, Jason, about the luck or whatnot that you've had with police. My luck hasn't been so great. It's been on the horrible end of the scale. So any interactions that I've had with the police haven't been great. It's not like they did anything crazy, but it's always ended up with me going to a holding cell or just them talking, inappropriately, or just not handling the situation the best they could. I've been stereotyped. I've been racially profiled, the whole thing.
Right.
But I did have those limited interactions where things were okay, where the police just, I was speeding. I knew it. I knew I was going to get a ticket, but they said, hey, you know what? Just slow down and just do what you got to do. I know you're a young kid and you're trying to get to the store or whatever, man. Just chill. So some police are honest and they're not really out to get you. They're more there, like you said, to coach you and just kind of like help out in the community, because they know I'm just a young kid, right out of high school, just trying to get to where I need to get to. And I just did 5 miles over the speed limit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Something else to mention is that, I've been living in St. Louis for 13 or so years. So I've been in St. Peter's, O'Fallon, St. Charles. I've been in those areas like St. Louis. And I haven't had the best of luck with police. It's been a horrible experience, but I now live in Wentzville. And Wentzville has been great. And I'm not just saying that because I've never been pulled over, because I haven't. I've been in Wentzville for 3 years now. Never been pulled over, never got racially profiled, never been, I do the rolling stops right in front of the police officers and they don't trip about.
That's not good. Come on, man.
I do it right in front of them. But here's the thing, there's nobody around and it's like in a desert field somewhere. They don't care, man. They're like, dude, whatever. But
wait a minute, hold on.
Say,
Chris, keep your kids away from John when he's driving, all right?
We're not riding with Jonathan. Nobody in my family is riding with Jonathan.
But anyway,
out of Wentzville.
Right.
I would say that Wentzville police are great, man. They interact with the community. Mayor Nick, he just put something out there a couple of weeks ago where they said that they've initiated something new. They've probably been doing it on a small scale, but he's encouraging them to do it more often. And what that is any neighborhood that throws a block party, they said that as long as we organize it and we put a date out there or whatever the case may be, they'll send officers to the block party and they'll come hang out with us and play ball and barbecue and kick it, and we could chit chat with them and have a conversation and get to know the police force. You know what I'm saying?
Talking about.
That's something they're doing here. That's something they're doing here in Wentzville. And I'm like, wow, this would be a beautiful thing in other different areas. I mean, that helps,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's exactly it. That gets that creates the right perception on both sides. And it's that going that the police are there as part of the community to help the community stay safe. They're not there to write you tickets. They're going to have to do that now and then, but they're not there just to get you on every little law breaking thing potential or to be this nemesis. They're, in theory, police are there, again, it's on all of their cars to protect and serve.
Protect and serve.
Protect and serve. You protect the community, you serve the community. And I think that, and even in those, it takes things like that because there's a lot of situations where people grow up not seeing that at all.
Yeah.
And it's whether or not they've had bad experiences, they don't see the be a part of the community type of thing. They might not experience, or have horrible experiences with police, but if you're not seeing what they should be doing, which is being part of that community, even a good experience is going to fall flat because you're not getting anything else out of that. You're going to be like me going, my interactions have been fine, but I haven't also been going, this is great. They're coming to barbecues and stuff or block parties and things because I'm like, they leave me alone. And I don't roll stop signs. I make complete stops.
For the record.
It's a pet peeve of mine.
I would say this, for the most part of my life, I've always been nervous around police officers. And it's just because of my experience and just being black and how I grew up. It was never, my parents didn't raise me to not trust police. It was just the nature of the situation. when it came to the Black community, police just didn't interact with us the way people think they do. It was very inappropriate. Sometimes they pulled you over for no reason. I could recall times where I had a license plate light out. They pulled me over for that. I mean, just ridiculous stuff, you know?
Right.
But I would say that, you know, like I said, my whole life I've been nervous. A cop pulls up behind me and doesn't even have his lights on. I'm nervous. You know, the cop is riding on the side of me. I'm nervous. The cop is in Walmart just minding his business. I'm nervous. You know, it's always been this nervous thing. Here out in Wentzville, that nervousness, it's kind of disappeared, man. I interact with the police. I know a few of them. Like when I see them, I'm like, hey, what's up? How you doing? They ride by, they wave at me. It's more of a like you said, they interact with the community. The community feels safe. We entrust them. And we have that relationship. I've never had this in Wentzville, what I have now. I've never had that in any other area that I've lived in St. Louis.
Well,
yeah, that's awesome.
I got to say, guys, I think, you know, we started off talking about schools. We come around to crime and policing and protecting. So this is an amazing conversation, because I think that the more we can talk like this with each other, because we're all neighbors, whether, you know, we all live in the same county in the same basic area, but we're neighbors with the people that are still living in the places that you grew up in Overland, you grew up in North County. They're our neighbors. And the more that maybe we can take this and spread it and continue for us, just talk about it, but maybe we can get to where the police in the hood, you know, show up at the block party. You know, wouldn't that be something amazing? And maybe they're doing it now and we're not aware of it. I don't know, but
maybe,
you know, that might be a tremendous step toward building some trust. And honestly, John, you talked about it, and I'm you didn't say these are your experiences as a kid, or you know, maybe you had some of those direct experiences, but if John the police officer had known John the kid from a block party, and then saw that maybe he was taking starting on a path that was challenging, maybe instead of throwing him in the back of a car and throwing him in cuffs and having a violent interaction, he can help straighten that kid out and pay a little more attention to that kid going forward, because you know that kid from interactions, as opposed to, you know, just meeting him for the first time and seeing that he's talking to somebody that's in a gang that you know. So
or maybe, you know, in an interaction where you know, multiple cops show up, but that one or two cops, they know you from multiple interactions, and instead of taking an aggressive approach, it might be a situation where they're like, hey John, come on man, we like, really, you're doing this, like, let's talk about it, you know. It's a better interaction that doesn't lead to me being put in a chokehold or me being slammed to the ground. It's a simple, you know, conversation. Maybe I do need to get arrested, but it's a pretty relaxed approach. And then we go down to the station, get it all hammered out, and I'm let go or something. I don't know. I'm just.
It's the real question that Jason was mentioning is this a situation that as a police officer, or is, you know, we're going to see some things some people that are not police officers in Minneapolis, it looks like, in the near future, that are maintaining the law in different ways, or is this a situation that I'm policing, or am I actually protecting and serving somebody at this point? And do I need to protect, or do I need to serve in this situation? And maybe we get back to that as a fundamental. So we've been talking for a while, so I don't want to keep going, but I would really, we're gonna keep doing this every couple of weeks or so, and we'll bring on some more people, and we'll shuffle some people in and out. But I think the more that we can have conversations here, we can take those back and talk to people that aren't here, right? So if we could start having, because I feel like this conversation, talking to somebody at work, might be a really uncomfortable situation, or somebody that you don't know real well. Honestly, I know the three of you. I don't know. We're not all friends in real life, so we don't know each other super well. So we've been able to have this somewhat awkward conversation where we all come from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And we find, again, that's what I keep coming back to. We have about 95% common ground. And for some reason, we allow the media and our politicians and certain people that are out there talking to focus us in on that 5% we disagree about.
So I would say this, Dirk. Me and Chris had this conversation. It comes down to having an intelligent conversation, right? Being able to be comfortable to present your point of view and not turn it into a debate. You know, we're not here to debate. We're just here to speak from our experiences, right? And this gives myself us an opportunity to hear other people's point of views and really listen. Jason was able to get a wealth of information today from my perspective of how I grew up. I was able to hear from Jason's point of view of how he grew up. And now maybe we could take this information and say, you know what? I've just gained some new information today. I kind of understand a little bit better. Let me take this further and start having these conversations and kind of getting more educated on these things so we can initiate this change.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't feel like we talked about it. I feel like there's another 4. I feel like
5 hours more left, man.
we got 4 more hours of material minimum to cover, but we're going to keep coming back to it, and let's all just keep talking between us, and let's take the conversation out to people we know, and let's start having open. The company I work for has talked to leaders about having awkward conversations with their employees, and I think we can do that with each other as community members as well. So let's start talking about awkward things, and realize that the people we're talking to, no matter what their background, their financial standing, whatever, all of us are adults, generally with families and with real, actual experiences that have real meaning, even though they're different experiences. So, Chris, Jason, John, thank you for today. I appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and we'll come back again, and we'll make our group look a little different next time, but we'll keep talking to every single one of you at different points in time and continue this conversation.
Yeah, we don't want you to be pinned as sexist, so yeah, let's get some females on here.
Thanks for looking out, man. I appreciate that. We'll do that. That'll happen next time.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Great to meet you guys.
Hey, great to meet you, Jason.
Jason.
Thanks for joining, man. It was good to talk to you, really.
Yeah, you guys as well. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.